Thank you. Some of you may know that a couple of weeks ago the diocese had a peer review. The peer review is a process being introduced to facilitate learning and improve shared accountability across the Church of England. The primary objective being to help strengthen diocese's mission and finances. As part of the process, each diocese is asked to complete a self-assessment form, which explores developments relating to growth, the common good, reimagining ministry, strategic leadership, leadership culture, and the use of resources. The consultation on the day included members of the bishop's staff, the chair of the Board of Finance, the lay and ordained chairs of Synod. It also included telephone conversations with a number of lay and ordained people from across the diocese prior to that particular meeting, and it was pretty thorough. Part of the self-assessment included the old SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And I'd like to highlight just a few things in the hope that you might recognise them and even possibly agree with one or two of them. Strengths, we said, included real diocesan ownership of the vision and mission, with a commitment to growing disciples, transforming communities, mixed economy church, fresh expressions of church, of which there are 56 across the diocese, pioneer ministry, including experimenting with interim ministers, a commitment to mission and work with children and young people, and mission partnerships, to name but a few of them. Critical to delivering any of these and the overall diocesan strategy has been the deep commitment and the tremendous work done in our parishes, and in which we celebrate and rejoice. And of course, in the lay and ordained leadership we have across the diocese, and which, as we heard this morning, certainly from the ordained perspective, is continuing to grow. Thank you for all you are doing. It is greatly appreciated and valued. And this work is supported by the parish support team, appointed to help parishes implement core strengths of the strategy. We rejoice in a bishop's staff committed to mission and growth, and that very same commitment is one of the key elements we are looking for in the new bishop. And again, I'd personally like to thank the staff team for their support, and the work also of the bishop's office and also the diocesan office in supporting all that we're trying to do. Overall, we have collaborative leadership across the diocese, which includes significant unpaid ministry of self-supporting and retired ministers, and a breadth of recognised lay ministry, and a commitment to training, not least through the St Peter's College. I always like to reflect on the word collaborative. We talk about collaborative ministry a lot. I went off the word, I have to say, collaborative, when a member of my congregation, when I was a parish priest, said to me, "You do realise, Bishop, don't you, that collaborative means communicating with the enemy?" And I hope it doesn't feel like that when we're trying to work together across the diocese in terms of God's mission. We also have a real commitment to growing vocations, again, as we've heard this morning, vocations to lay and ordained ministry, supported by an experienced and wise team, with a good choice of vocational pathways and training providers. Clear leadership priorities and plan for education is another key priority, as is developing, as again we've just heard, our safeguarding following the positive audit. And for this, we've been extremely grateful. I want to pass on my thanks, as well as that of the archdeacons, to all those who have been working on this, but particularly to Linda, our safeguarding officer, who only joined us a few months ago, and also to the safeguarding management group. These and many other things being done imaginatively and creatively, particularly at the parish level, make the Diocese of Sheffield an exciting place to be and minister. It's an attractive place for our new bishop to come and join in the direction we've set. It's a place where, despite the difficulties of attracting people to the north, as we know, we do want to invite others to join us on our journey. That's not to say we didn't recognise areas for further development, and there are a number of things that we described as works in progress, not least as we come out of a period where the previous bishop led the vision clearly and pulled the team together. There's a certain anxiety that a new bishop might have different ideas, which may cause some faltering. We have again highlighted this to those being considered as our new bishop. We are aware that all of us are working at capacity and beyond. Progress of the mission partnership model is not yet proven and fully owned. There's no strategy for underrepresented groups, as again we heard this morning. And as I indicated, filling vacancies in existing parish models still dominates and is difficult to shift. And there were a number of other things we could have identified. So on the whole, we're in good place, with a good heart, with good health, but honest about what still needs to be done, and there's no complacency, just hope, expectation and anticipation in God's mission. All of our strategies are based on becoming an outward focused and engaged church, bringing people to faith and walking alongside people on their journey in life and faith. There are practical things that we have to do, such as finance, and they can't be ignored. But most importantly, we're called to mission. One of the strategies, which I haven't yet mentioned, but which is critical to this, is our salt and light strategy. And that too was questioned at the peer review, with an admission that it hasn't perhaps had the same prominence as other aspects of our vision. It's partly due, of course, to the fact that so many good and significant things that come under the umbrella of salt and light are already being done in our parishes, mostly unnoticed and sometimes undervalued. We have individuals and teams of people working keenly in supporting others as part of the vision to transform our society and God's world, supported by the Board of Faith and Justice. It may be some while since you looked at this key strategy document, and so it's worth reminding ourselves about some of what it says. The document reminds us that God calls his people to pray for the coming of the kingdom and to love our neighbours as ourselves. In the Old Testament, God called Abraham so that in him all the families of the earth would be blessed. The law that came through Moses is a law that upholds the rights of the widows, orphans, refugees and the poor. The prophets call us to challenge unjust structures. The Gospels tell us that Jesus came proclaiming God's kingdom, peace and justice. His whole ministry was about serving others, relieving the suffering of others, and challenging those in authority and power. Jesus called his disciples, and he calls us to have an impact beyond our community as salt and light in the world. The call to serve our society and transform God's world is a key part of discipleship and our witness to the difference that Christ makes in our lives as we draw others to faith. The strategy document also highlights a number of things that need transforming, such as climate change, poverty, war and violence, the sense of powerlessness experienced by many, inequality and inequality that undermines community cohesion, levels of care available to an ageing population, young people and families, the treatment of asylum seekers, those with disability and mental health issues, unemployment and the economy, and of course, not forgetting ourselves. We need to look at where we see God already doing work. We need to develop partnerships within and outside the diocese, and we need to pray. One of our link officers, Pete, wrote this: and it can be found if you look for it on the Dawson website. Pete said, "I've often noticed that God, incarnate in Jesus and present in our neighbours, calls us to meet and serve him in and through our vulnerabilities. This can feel painful and risky when we have lived experience of the issues we seek to address. This is especially true for congregants or those on the fringes of congregation whose involvement with the church may principally be focused on their activities, supporting others who are vulnerable and isolated." The strategy also goes on to suggest the ways that we as individuals and churches can respond. And we are encouraged to do that by the number of Salt and Light link officers we have in our parishes. The issues I've highlighted in this strategy inevitably impact mostly on the poor and the vulnerable. And I and we are constantly reminded of this in our ministries. But we too sometimes become vulnerable in our own lives that needs transformation. And if you'll forgive me for being personal just for a moment, as many of you know, Jane was diagnosed last year, Jane, my wife that is, was diagnosed last year with early onset Alzheimer's. And dementia care is a core part of the Board on Faith and Justice. This has meant for me and Jane inevitably readjusting to the way we live and plans for the future. But without the support of people in the diocese, of friends and family, and the excellent care offered in Doncaster, things would have been much more difficult and grim. The small but significant offers of help and support, the kind words in difficult moments, have transformed what could have been a much bleaker future. It teaches us that while we are looking to our greater communities, don't forget that those around you may be in need of God's transforming love. So don't just look at the big picture, look at the small picture as well. In ministry, like many of you, I constantly meet and am humbled by conversations with people facing situations that I can't even begin to imagine. Horrific stories of asylum seekers and what they've witnessed, the vulnerability, hostility and corruption they faced, and the abuse suffered by traffickers. On our streets, we daily face those who are homeless, alone and afraid, and many just walk by and ignore them. I often challenge myself to think how I would feel if I was out on the street, or if a member of my family or a friend were out on the street and just completely ignored, when a kind word, a hot drink bought at Costa perhaps on a cold winter's day, might just be transforming in some ways for them. Of course, we want to transform people's lives by bringing them to Jesus and to have lives that are changed and transformed by his saving love and grace. But with some, we have to start at the practical level of help and support and show them God's love in action. This was brought home to me just recently in a conversation with an organisation that some of you may know called Night Stop. Night Stop is part of the part of DePaul UK, which is part of DePaul International, a group of charities working to support homeless and marginalised people around the world. They've recently set up a Night Stop in Sheffield and hope to do so in other parts of South Yorkshire soon. Night Stop Services offers emergency accommodation to vulnerable young people at risk of homelessness in the homes, and it offers them in homes of trained and vetted volunteers for one night at a time. Over 600 volunteer households opened their homes in 2015, and there are 33 services running in the UK. Last year, they provided 13,438 bed nights. And this is what one of the volunteers said. "We have 2 daughters of our own, and we thought if anything had happened to them, we'd have liked someone to take them in. We moved into this house 2 years ago, and it had a spare bedroom. I wanted it to be for someone to sleep in, not just get filled up with junk. Sometime later, I saw an article in the paper asking for volunteers who had a spare room to help look after young homeless people. All the young people are different. Some are very unsure. They don't know what they're doing. Others are more confident and take it in their stride. Some are wondering what's going to happen to them next. I just assure them that they're known about. They're in the system. And for the moment, they have somewhere to sleep while they get some help. One young man had been sleeping in the park and the railway station, so without night stop, he would certainly have been rough sleeping again. In the diocese, I hear regular stories of people helping in this way, or helping at food banks, dementia cafes, luncheon clubs, addressing issues of poverty and the environment. We may sometimes feel overwhelmed by the enormity of what God is calling us to do. We may feel inadequate, as I do every year, particularly at this time, when, like many of you, I'm bombarded with charities asking for money, and I feel slightly guilty that I can't respond to them all. We're about to enter Advent. As God's people, we wait the return of Christ in glory to consummate his eternal kingdom. The church is in a similar situation to Israel, waiting and hoping in prayerful expectation for the coming of the Messiah. The church, during Advent, looks back upon Christ's coming in celebration, while at the same time looking forward in eager anticipation to the coming of Christ's kingdom when he returns for his people. And we're called to continue his mission, his work and his ministry in the in-between time. And that includes a bias to the poor and the marginalised in the very broadest sense. A reaching out in love and compassion to help their practical needs as an outward example and witness of God's love, and in drawing them ever closer to their Lord and Saviour. Thank you.